welcome. I'm Rick Newman, Executive Director of the American Museum of Tort Law, with another in our series of interesting talks with interesting people on law-related topics. Our guest today is Joanne Doroshow, who is the founder and Executive Director of the Center for Justice and Democracy, which is the nation's only consumer protection institution aimed at protecting our civil justice system. Joanne, it's a pleasure seeing you again. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, first of all, just for our viewers, what is our civil justice system and why does it need protection?
Well, most people are probably familiar with the criminal justice system where somebody is charged with a crime and they go through that criminal process. That's one side of the justice system. The other side of it is the civil justice system, where if somebody has been harmed as a result of either intentional wrongdoing or negligence, you have a right to sue or take that person to court to try to get compensation, damages, also to try to stop the misconduct. So it's a very important avenue that people have, a very important right that people have, not only to try to get justice, but also to try to stop bad behavior.
For deterrence.
Deterrence.
Yeah. And so you talk about protecting the civil justice system, and I know about some of the attacks, but tell us, please, what are these attacks on the civil justice system?
The attacks on the civil justice system mostly come from large corporations and the insurance industry. In other words, the people that are causing a lot of wrongdoing and have to pay out money when they harm, injure people, kill people. So, of course, they don't want to have to do that. And they have been for now 40 some years going around to state legislatures, to Congress, and asking for laws that limit their liability, their accountability if they do something wrong. Normally, the jury system works as it should. The civil jury works without limits and just listens to evidence in a case and makes a decision as to a verdict about the amount of compensation that somebody should be getting without limits. It's really the way our system was developed, the founding of our country. What these tort reform or corporate attacks on the liability systems really are taking power and authority away from juries who listen to evidence and decide cases, making sure they can't award damages or extreme limits to the amount of damages, compensation that they can award, and also making sure that the people who have been harmed, placing obstacles in the way of people who have been harmed to access the courts as they should be able to.
Yeah, one of those is these mandatory arbitration clauses that people unknowingly often get wrapped up in when they click to accept terms and conditions. How does that work? Why does that work?
This is a massive new problematic area when it comes to your rights to civil justice. Since a few Supreme Court decisions beginning in 2011, corporations have been allowed to place clauses in any kind of contract. We're talking about with your bank, with your cell phone service, if you're trying to get a job in your employment contract, trying to admit somebody into a nursing home, taking an Uber or a Lyft, any of the gig economy, ride share, or any other type of service where you're trying to obtain a service through some kind of online contract. These companies are sticking clauses in websites, places where nobody would even know to look, often though, even if you did look, there's nothing you can do to get them out. And what they do is they require that your case, if you have a dispute, even an injury, that your dispute has to be resolved not in a court before a judge and jury, but in a rigged, private, secretive system called arbitration that is controlled by the company, where you have no right to appeal. You have no right to basic evidence rules and procedural rules that are in the courts to protect you. All of those are thrown out the window. arbitrators don't have to be lawyers. They can make rulings that are not even legally correct, and yet you are bound by them. And increasingly, we're seeing these clauses in any kind of consumer, or as I said, even injury relationships that you might have with hospitals, nursing homes, and so forth. And it has been devastating to the right to trial by jury in this country.
But don't we have a constitutional right to trial by jury?
The Seventh Amendment to the Constitution guarantees the right to trial by jury in civil cases. This was a very important right that the founders of the country felt important enough to put in the Bill of Rights. The Revolutionary War was fought in part over this, over the insistence that juries make decisions and not corrupt admiralty courts that they were used to in England, for example.
So how does arbitration work if it deprives people of that constitutional right? How can that be?
The courts, unfortunately, have made decisions that balance that right against other rights or other privileges that corporations might want to access. And in the 1920s, Congress passed a law called the Federal Arbitration Act, which was simply a law to facilitate arbitration between equal companies that would decide to arbitrate a dispute rather than go to court. Basically, this was a law that says it's okay. But in 2011, the Supreme Court decided to look at that ancient law and say basically, okay, Congress has decided it wants to resolve all disputes in arbitration, if that's what a company wants to do, even if you are a consumer that has no bargaining power in this situation. So they made this decision that this is what Congress wanted. And they said it's more important that Congress wanted that rather than consumers, patients, average Americans have a constitutional right to trial by jury. It was a devastating decision by the Supreme Court. And ever since, there have been bills in Congress to try to fix this. And there is one that's moving through Congress right now called the FAIR Act. And it would make exceptions to the Federal Arbitration Act. It would make sure that if you were a consumer, if you are an employee, if you have a civil rights claim, if you have an antitrust claim, a consumer claim, you would be allowed to go to court and they could not force you into arbitration. But as we know, it's very difficult to get Congress to pass laws, right? Particularly these days. So, so far, even though many people have been trying to get this law passed, it still hasn't passed.
In addition to the, I guess, Supreme Court decision in 2011, basically mandating the availability of arbitration, one of the arguments that's always tossed out is that this will help avoid the flood of litigation. Are we awash in lawsuits in this country? What is the state of civil litigation, the number of trials, et cetera?
Well, the kind of lawsuits that we're talking about, tort suits, injury suits, are about 4 or 5% of the civil caseload in this country. It is a tiny percentage. The flood of suits that we're seeing are on the other side, from banks, debt collectors, mortgage companies, big institutions that are suing the little person, the little guy. We don't see laws to limit the rights of corporations to sue you. We only see laws, these tort reform laws, that would limit the rights of the average American to sue a corporation. So there's a really distorted picture that many people have, I think, about what's going on in the civil justice system. There are, far more injuries and instances of medical malpractice and other kinds of harms that exist in this country where nobody brings any kind of claim for. And, the vast 95% of the cases nobody files any sort of claim. But what we hear in the news sometimes, headlines about one person suing and getting a large verdict, it really distorts reality. Unfortunately, I would say that some of the media players are sort of unwitting participants in distorting this reality. It's nice to read a headline, from their perspective, talking about $1 million or, even more money that somebody might get awarded in one particular case. What we don't hear about are, the vast majority of cases where nobody brings a claim or gets zero in terms of their verdict.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think there's this perception that we're a litigious society when the reality is, I think, and please let me know about this, that tort law is underutilized. People are not filing claims when they could, or filing lawsuits when they could, and in some cases when they should. Is that?
I would say that's absolutely true. It's horribly underutilized. There's this, I think generally Americans are not likely to ever file a claim or go to court. I mean, there's sort of a bias against it almost. Whenever I talk to victims that have had, serious harm done to them, with very strong cases, and they do bring a case because they need compensation, their first sort of reaction is, well, I'm not the kind of person that sues, and I feel really embarrassed even bringing a suit, but I felt like there was no alternative. I had to do it, but almost shame for having done it. And I think that is unfortunately after lots of kind of orchestrated media efforts to shame people who do sue, to make it seem like this is some kind of unfair system, a lottery of sorts, that people are very likely much more likely not to go to court. And as I said, very, very few people. The last time a study was done by RAND, this think tank, of comparing the number of injuries where people would have a claim to actually who goes to court, they found 10% of people file a claim and maybe 2% end up in court. And that's it. So, it's a very, very underutilized system for sure.
Let's talk about my favorite bugaboo, the legendary frivolous lawsuit. Are we awash in frivolous lawsuits?
There is no evidence academically, government-wise. Nobody has ever looked at this, has ever found that we have a problem of frivolous lawsuits in this country. It's a nice talking point for corporate America, and the insurance industry, but it doesn't happen. One of the main reasons it doesn't happen is because we have a system called the contingency fee system, so that you can hire an attorney and you do not have to pay an hourly fee like a large corporation can afford to do, $1,000 an hour to their lawyer. You can get a lawyer, you don't have to pay them, and then you get a percentage they get a percentage of the judgment if they win. But what that does is it is a system that ends up screening out frivolous or baseless lawsuits, because the attorney knows that they will not be able to get a fee or even their costs covered unless they win the case. So they're very, very selective in the type of case that they bring. They're still very expensive to bring, and many legitimate cases don't go forward when they should. But there's certainly no problem of lawyers taking on frivolous cases. If that were true, then we would see law firms going out of business left and right, because they are small businesses like everybody else. They can't afford to keep bringing cases that they're going to lose and get, no compensation for that, no fee for that, for their effort or for their costs. So there really is no evidence at all, and common sense dictates that we do not have a problem of frivolous cases in this country. Now, that's from the consumer standpoint, from the injured person standpoint. When we're talking about debt collectors or mortgage companies who are going after everyday people, yeah, I'm sure there are plenty of frivolous lawsuits in that kind of space. But, That those are not the tort suits that are the subject of what we're talking about and that get attacked all the time in the press.
All right. So I guess the last section of things I wanted to cover today is what has been the effect of COVID on the civil justice system? How has that affected things, trials and litigation in general? And what does the future hold if you have your crystal ball buffed up and ready to go?
Yeah, I mean, COVID has had a drastically negative impact on people's rights to go to court. There are jury trials stopped. There are now enormous backlogs in the civil courts. We have more constitutional rights for the criminal justice system for people that have been kept out of court in the criminal side, because there are rights to speedy trial, things that we don't have in the civil side. So oftentimes judges are much more likely to start up the criminal side of things when everything's been backlogged rather than civil court. So what you hear, because everything stopped during 2020, the courts were closed, juries were not able to meet, is the civil justice system ground to a halt. And now so many cases are backlogged that people are talking about not even being able to get into court for 2-3 years. This has had a devastating impact on people's civil justice rights. It has also allowed the insurance industry to stop settling cases, because often it's the threat of a jury trial. Even if the case doesn't go to trial, it's the knowledge that that could happen that will cause an insurance company to settle a case with merit. They're not doing that now. And I've been on webinars where insurance industry representatives have talked about the fact that they can walk away from cases and not settle cases that they had previously settled because of COVID. So it's been a windfall for the insurance industry for sure, and you see that in the profit figures that are coming out now. The beginning of 2021, looking back at what 2020 profits have been for the insurance industry, the industry that pays these claims, they're making profits through the roof. It's been a huge windfall for them. And in very limited cases, only very limited cases have they reduced anybody's premiums. There's been some pressure in the auto industry for the auto insurers to give some premium dollars back, only because some consumer groups have pressured them to do it, but only a very limited amount. During the first half of 2020, nobody was even driving. So there was no reason for them to be charging the rates that they were charging for motorists. But they don't normally reduce premiums unless they're forced to do it. And it's been very, rare that they've actually given any money back to motorists, even in the auto area. But I would say the same is true for just about any other area. Healthcare, for example, the 35 states have passed some kind of immunity for healthcare, and some of these laws extend beyond COVID cases. So,
explain what you mean when you say past immunity. Tell us what that means.
The medical industry went to state lawmakers and to governors and said, during COVID, we want to make sure that nobody can sue the healthcare industry, the medical industry, for any kind of medical negligence during COVID. Now, of course, nobody was even thinking about bringing cases against hospitals and doctors during COVID, and so it was not a problem that needed any sort of solution, but they went to lawmakers and said, this is a crisis. We have to provide immunity to doctors and hospitals. So some states passed very broad immunity, so that even if somebody went in and was misdiagnosed for cancer during 2020, the argument would be that the healthcare provider was acting under some kind of emergency, because they were still acting under days of COVID, and therefore nobody who was misdiagnosed with cancer should be allowed to sue them either. mean, the way that some of the healthcare professionals have tried to use this kind of emergency immunity that was provided for COVID is disgusting. There was an article I saw the other day that a doctor that operated on the wrong side of a woman's spine and it was a terrible instance of malpractice, was trying to use it as a defense the COVID emergency that they were provided. So, this is outrageous stuff. And but it all sort of points to the fact that the healthcare industry has not been subject to very many lawsuits in 2020. The medical malpractice insurance industry is still raising rates on doctors and hospitals. They should have been giving money back during this period. And they're just continuing to kind of price gouge their customers, even though people's access to the courts have been so limited and cut off.
Where can people go to learn more about how this insurance business works?
We have done a lot of studies on this. We have a few, if you go to our website, which is centerjd.org, the Center for Justice and Democracy. We're constantly monitoring how the industry is managing all of this, because it really is disgusting that they have tried to victimize themselves here. And
is Insurance Fat Cat still a viable website too?
Yep, insurancefatcat.com. We've got some. We're doing actually a new manual, but we have some instructional manuals about how the insurance industry works, and we're doing a new one about how they have behaved during COVID, which talks about some of the things I talked about right here.
Well, you can see how really terrible it is, because the insurance companies during this last year, where they haven't been paying or settling claims, make more profits. The people whose lives have been broken and damaged, who need the money to put their lives back together, have been left without recourse. So this really has been a terrible 15, 18-month period. And we're just now starting to see some hopeful resumption of trials and litigation. But it's fitful, and it's still, nothing is going very smoothly. So listen, thank you very much. This is Joanne Doroshow. She is at the Center for Justice and Democracy. We are going to put a link below to that website. It is a tremendous resource. You should check it out. It's got real, accurate, factual information about civil justice, civil litigation, efforts to limit people's access to courts, the way the insurance industry is profiteering. It's an outstanding resource. Center for Justice and Democracy. We'll put a link below for that. Also, we'll put a link for Insurance Fat Cat. Finally, I'm going to put a link down below for an interview that Joanne did a year ago at a podcast called Citations Needed. That was a whole hour-long program devoted to debunking this myth of the frivolous lawsuits. And Joanne spoke eloquently about the benefits of tort law and why frivolous lawsuits are really just a tool that insurance companies use to cudgel the legislators into limiting people's rights. So if you like this video, subscribe and like, and you know what to do for our videos. This is Joanne Doroshow, Executive Director of the Center for Justice and Democracy, one of the nation's experts on civil justice and a strong advocate for protecting people's rights. Joanne, it's a pleasure seeing you again. Thank you very much.
It was my pleasure. Thanks so much.
Okay, thanks. Bye.